A wolf collapsed at her cabin door. She didn't know its heartbeat matched the crown's prophecy. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Evelyn Harper had learned the language of the woods the way some people learned prayer, quietly and without witnesses, and that night the forest spoke in warning before it showed its hand. The wind pressed against her small log cabin like a held breath, pine needles ticking against the window glass, the thermometer nailed beside the door hovering just below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. She had just set her kettle on the stove when a sound cut through the wind, not a howl and not a knock, but something between the two, a low thud followed by a scrape that dragged across the porch boards. Evelyn froze, listening, counting her own breaths, the way she did when storms made the power flicker. Another sound followed, softer this time, like weight settling where it shouldn't be. She wrapped her wool cardigan tighter and opened the door an inch, letting cold spill across the floor. A shape lay against the threshold, pale against the dark, steam lifting from its body in thin ribbons. It was a wolf, larger than any she had seen in these mountains, its fur white as fresh snow and matted along one flank, its sides moving in shallow, uneven pulls. Its head rested against the doorframe as if it had chosen that exact place to stop. Evelyn should have closed the door. She knew the rules out here. You didn't invite trouble in, and you didn't pretend you could fix everything. But the wolf's eye opened, not wide, not wild, just enough to meet hers. And in that glance there was no threat, only exhaustion that felt uncomfortably familiar. She set the kettle aside and knelt, the porch boards cold through her jeans, the smell of wood smoke and winter sharp in her nose. The wolf did not bare its teeth. It did not growl. Its chest rose and fell, slow as a clock that needed winding. She felt the rhythm before she touched it, steady beneath the fur, a pulse that seemed too precise for a creature that should have been running free under the stars. Evelyn swallowed and made a choice she would later struggle to explain. She fetched a blanket from the chair by the fire and slid it beneath the wolf's shoulder, careful, murmuring the same nonsense words she used on frightened horses back when the ranch still had fences. The wolf's breath hitched, then eased, and when she pressed her palm to its chest to judge the warmth, the beat there matched her own, not in speed but in certainty, like two metronomes agreeing on time. She tugged the door wider, inch by inch, letting lamplight spill across white fur and snow, and pulled with all the strength her quiet life had given her, dragging the heavy warmth inside. The door shut with a click that sounded final. Outside, the wind moved on, as if it had delivered what it came for. Inside, by the fire's low glow, Evelyn Harper sat on the floor and kept her hand where the heartbeat lived, unaware that far beyond the trees, in stone halls she had never seen, old words were waiting for that very rhythm to be heard again. Morning did not arrive all at once, but in cautious pieces, a pale gray light pressing through the frost-edged window, the fire reduced to a bed of coals that still breathed warmth into the room. Evelyn woke on the floor with a stiff neck and her blanket half gone, pulled away sometime in the night. For one quiet second she forgot why she was there. Then she felt the presence beside her, solid and warm, and memory settled back into place. The wolf lay stretched near the hearth, its white fur catching the firelight like ash-dusted snow. Its breathing was deeper now, steadier, each rise and fall measured, as if it knew exactly how much air to take. Evelyn did not move right away. She listened. The cabin had its own morning sounds, the soft pop of cooling logs, the tick of the old wall clock, the faint creak of timber adjusting to the cold. Outside, the wind had eased, leaving behind a silence that felt earned. She pushed herself up slowly and reached for the kettle, filling it from the jug and setting it on the stove. The wolf's ear twitched at the sound. Its eye opened again, that same calm, watchful awareness, and this time it stayed open. They regarded each other across a few feet of wooden floor, neither startled, neither rushing the moment. Evelyn crouched and checked the blanket she had wrapped around its side. There was no fresh blood, only a dark stain dried into the wool. She pressed her hand gently along the fur, stopping when she felt warmth instead of damp cold. The wolf did not flinch. Its tail gave a small, uncertain movement, the kind a dog might make when it was not sure if it was welcome. The kettle began to hiss, and Evelyn poured hot water into a mug, the steam fogging her glasses. She took a sip, grounding herself in the familiar bitterness, then fetched the old first aid kit from beneath the sink. She had not planned to use it on anything larger than herself in years. As she worked, she noticed things that did not fit neatly into her understanding of the world. The wolf's body was heavy but balanced in a way that felt deliberate, not wild. Its heartbeat, still strong beneath her palm, held to that same steady rhythm, a cadence that reminded her of the antique clock her father used to wind every Sunday without fail. When she leaned closer to listen, she could have sworn the beat adjusted slightly, as if acknowledging her presence. The fire cracked softly. The light grew stronger. Outside, a bird tested the morning with a single note. Evelyn finished and sat back on her heels, letting out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She spoke then, quietly, not because she expected an answer, but because silence felt too sharp. She told the wolf her name. She told it there was coffee and warmth and no hurry to leave. The wolf watched her mouth move, its gaze intent, and when she paused, it shifted, drawing its legs beneath itself with a carefulness that looked almost practiced. For a heartbeat, just one, the air between them felt charged, like the moment before a storm that never comes. Evelyn stood and opened the door a crack to let in fresh air. The forest waited, patient and unchanged, but the cabin no longer. Felt like a place apart from the world. When she turned back, the wolf had lifted its head higher, eyes bright, posture alert but unafraid, as if it understood, in some quiet way, that this threshold was no longer just a door, and that something had already crossed it. By midday the light had shifted, turning the frost outside into a glittering skin over the forest floor, and Evelyn found herself moving through the cabin as if it were shared space now, mindful of each step. The wolf had risen some time after breakfast, standing with a careful grace that made her pause, its height nearly reaching her chest when it lifted its head. It tested its weight slowly, adjusting, as though relearning balance rather than pushing through pain. Evelyn watched, ready to help, then stopped herself, sensing that offering too much might be as wrong as offering nothing at all. She busied her hands instead, slicing bread, setting out a bowl of water, the small rituals of care that had always steadied her. When she turned back, the wolf had crossed the room and was examining the door, nose brushing the wood, ears tilted toward sounds she could not hear. Sunlight touched its fur and, for a moment, it looked almost silver, the white threaded with pale shadows that moved when it breathed. Evelyn spoke again, telling it the weather would hold, that the trail down the mountain was clear for at least a few miles, information offered without expectation. The wolf turned its head, and something in its gaze shifted, a focus that felt startlingly human, as if it were weighing her words instead of merely hearing them. She noticed then the marks she had missed before, faint lines beneath the fur at its throat and chest, not scars but patterns, subtle and symmetrical, revealed only when the light struck just right. Her hand hovered, then settled back at her side. Some things asked to be discovered, not taken. The hours passed in quiet companionship. Evelyn split firewood on the porch, the sharp crack echoing through the trees, while the wolf rested just inside the threshold, watching her with unblinking attention. Once, when the axe stuck and she had to brace her boot against the log to pull it free, she felt a presence at her back and turned to find the wolf standing close, steady, as if offering support without touching. The gesture caught her breath. She laughed softly, surprised by the sound of her own voice, and the wolf's tail moved again, that same tentative sweep. In the afternoon, clouds gathered low over the ridge, and with them came a distant sound, not thunder but horns, faint and far, carried on the cold air. Evelyn felt the hair on her arms lift. The wolf heard it too, body tensing, eyes narrowing toward the forest. It stepped closer to her this time, not seeking shelter but alignment, positioning itself at her side. She placed a hand on its shoulder without thinking, grounding herself in the solid warmth there. The sound faded, leaving behind questions she did not yet know how to ask. When evening came, she lit the lamps early. The wolf lay near the hearth again, its breathing even, but its eyes remained open, tracking the door, the windows, the shifting light. Evelyn sat in her chair and watched the flames, feeling the day settle into her bones. She understood, with a clarity that felt both simple and immense, that whatever had found its way to her cabin was not finished with its journey, and that her role, whatever it was, had already begun the moment she chose not to turn away. The night settled heavier than the one before, clouds pressing low enough that the forest seemed to hold its breath, and Evelyn felt the shift long before the temperature dipped again. She set another log on the fire and watched sparks rise, counting them the way she used to count stars when sleep refused to come. The wolf remained awake, pacing once, twice, then stopping near the center of the room as if measuring invisible lines only it could see. When it looked at her now, the distance in its gaze was gone, replaced by intent that felt like a question waiting for permission. Evelyn stood, slow and deliberate, and opened the small cabinet where she kept a radio that rarely worked anymore. She turned the dial out of habit, listening to static ebb and surge, and when a voice finally broke through, distorted and faint, the wolf stilled completely. Its head lifted, ears angled, and the patterns beneath its fur seemed to glow just enough to make her blink. She turned the radio off at once, the sudden quiet loud in her ears. The wolf exhaled, a long controlled release, and for the first time she heard something like relief. She crossed the room and sat on the floor again, close but not touching, offering presence instead of answers. Outside, the horns sounded again, closer this time, carried on the wind with a rhythm that did not belong to hunters or storms. The wolf's body responded without panic, muscles tightening in readiness rather than fear, and Evelyn realized with a strange calm that whatever searched the mountains was not looking for a beast, but for something that could listen and choose. She spoke softly, telling the wolf it could stay as long as it needed, that her cabin was not claimed by anyone who mattered. The words felt truer than she expected. The wolf turned its head and met her eyes, and in that shared look something shifted, a subtle alignment that made her chest ache. The air shimmered faintly, not with light, but with possibility, and she felt a warmth brush her skin like sunlight remembered. The wolf stepped closer and lowered its head until its brow nearly touched her shoulder, close enough that she could feel its breath without being overwhelmed by it. She did not pull away. She rested her hand against its neck and felt the heartbeat there, steady and strong, and beneath it something else, a resonance like a distant bell struck once and still ringing. Images flickered at the edge of her awareness, stone halls washed in morning light, banners moving without wind, a circle of figures listening for a sound they had been taught to fear and revere in equal measure. Evelyn did not see them clearly, but she felt the weight of expectation pressing toward this quiet room. The wolf drew back slightly, eyes searching her face as if gauging how much she understood, then made a sound she had never heard before, low and controlled, not a growl and not a word, but a deliberate attempt at meaning. She answered with a nod she did not plan, accepting without comprehension. The fire popped. The radio clicked once on its shelf, then fell silent. Outside, the horns faded, leaving behind a stillness that felt temporary, like the pause between heartbeats. Evelyn stayed where she was, hand resting lightly where fur met skin, aware with a certainty that surprised her that kindness was never small, that it moved through the world in ways no crown or prophecy could fully command, and that whatever path lay ahead had already chosen to walk through her door. Sleep came in fragments, light and shallow, and when Evelyn woke before dawn the cabin held a hush that felt deliberate, as if the world were listening. The fire had burned low again, coals breathing a dull red that painted the walls with slow-moving shadows. The wolf lay nearby, not sleeping so much as resting, eyes half-lidded yet aware, its presence steadying in a way she had not expected to need. She rose quietly and poured water into the kettle, setting it on the stove, then paused, sensing movement behind her. The wolf had stood without a sound, in the gray light seeping through the window. Its form seemed less animal and more something in between, posture precise, head held with a dignity that made her straighten without thinking. She felt the urge to ask 100 questions and let them all go. Some truths arrived better without pressure. She brewed coffee and set a mug on the table, then surprised herself by setting a second cup beside it. an offering more symbolic than useful. The wolf watched, curiosity flickering, and when she sat, it approached and lowered itself across from her, close enough that the table felt like a bridge instead of a barrier. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Outside, the clouds thinned, revealing a pale strip of sky that promised a clear day. Evelyn spoke of small things, of the creek down the slope that never froze all the way through, of the trail that led past the aspens toward the old fire lookout, of weather patterns and signs she trusted. The wolf listened with an intensity that made each word feel chosen. When she finished, it made that careful sound again, the almost word, and this time she understood it not as speech but as intent. It wanted to show her something. They stepped outside together, breath fogging in the cold. The forest greeted them with a stillness that felt respectful. The wolf moved a few paces ahead, then stopped and looked back, waiting. Evelyn followed, boots crunching softly on frost. Near the edge of the clearing, where the ground dipped, the wolf paused and pressed one paw to the earth. The soil there was marked with a faint impression. Not a track, but a symbol, lines curved and intersecting as if pressed from beneath rather than stamped from above. Evelyn knelt and traced the pattern with a gloved finger, feeling warmth rise through the leather. The air thrummed, subtle but unmistakable, and she sensed the same resonance she had felt by the fire, that distant bell echoing through bone and breath. The wolf stood beside her, eyes on the mark, then on her, as if asking not for belief but for witness. She nodded, a simple acceptance. Far away, horns sounded once more, then fell silent, their call no longer searching but confirming. Evelyn rose, brushed frost from her knees, and turned back toward the cabin. The wolf followed, and when they crossed the threshold together, the space felt altered, widened, as if the walls had agreed to hold more than before. She fed the fire and set bread to toast, grounding herself in routine, and felt a calm settle that did not erase uncertainty but made room for it. She understood then that the path ahead would ask for patience, for trust built in quiet acts rather than grand gestures. The wolf lay near the hearth, eyes closing at last, breath deep and even. Evelyn sat nearby and listened to the steady beat she had come to recognize, aware that whatever crown waited beyond the trees, whatever words were written in halls she would never enter, the truth had already found its way here, and it was content, for the moment, to rest. The day unfolded with a clarity that felt earned, sunlight spilling clean and cold across the clearing, and Evelyn found herself marking time by small, necessary tasks. She hauled water from the creek, the metal bucket biting at her fingers, and the wolf followed at a respectful distance, stepping where she stepped, avoiding the thin ice without instruction. When she paused to catch her breath, it paused too, head angled toward the trees, listening for what lay beyond her hearing. She noticed how it positioned itself between her and the open slope, not guarding so much as considering, measuring lines and possibilities. Back at the cabin, she laid out supplies, counting flour and beans, calculating days the way she always did, and felt an unexpected certainty settle in her chest. There would be enough. In the quiet hours that followed, she worked at the table, repairing a torn sleeve, needle flashing in the light, while the wolf rested nearby. Now and then it shifted, and each movement seemed chosen, deliberate, as if conserving not energy but attention. When the wind lifted, carrying distant sounds from the valley, the wolf's eyes opened, bright and focused, then softened again when nothing followed. Evelyn spoke without looking up, narrating the ordinary, grounding herself, and, she sensed, grounding it as well. In the afternoon, a low vibration moved through the ground, subtle but undeniable, and the radio clicked once on the shelf, drawing her gaze. She did not turn it on. The wolf rose and stood beside her, close enough that she could feel warmth through her sleeve. The air felt full, charged with expectation that did not demand action yet. She stepped outside with the wolf at her side and saw, far down the trail, a glint of metal where sunlight struck something tall and still. It did not approach. It did not retreat. It waited. Evelyn felt no fear, only a steady resolve that surprised her. She raised a hand, palm open, not as a signal but as a promise to herself. The wolf's breathing deepened, its heartbeat steady against her senses, and the resonance she had come to recognize answered from the distance, A reply carried through stone and air. The glint vanished, leaving the forest unchanged and yet altered. Evening came gently. She cooked and shared the warmth of the fire, and when she looked at the wolf she saw, layered beneath fur and form, a presence shaped by responsibility rather than hunger. She understood then that what bound them was not prophecy but consent, the choice to stand and be seen without surrendering oneself. As night settled, the wolf lay near the door, alert but calm, and Evelyn sat with her back against the wall, listening to the clock tick, each second a small affirmation. Somewhere beyond the trees, plans adjusted, routes reconsidered, words held back. Here, in a cabin built by careful hands, kindness continued its quiet work, patient and precise, waiting for the moment it would be asked to speak aloud. The first snow of the new storm arrived without urgency, flakes drifting down like thoughts reconsidered, and Evelyn felt the change before the sky fully committed. She moved through the cabin gathering what she might need, lantern trimmed, boots set by the door, not because she planned to leave, but because readiness had always been her way of listening. The wolf watched, posture attentive, eyes tracking her movements with an understanding that felt earned rather than assumed. When the wind rose, it did not howl but pressed, testing seams, and the distant horns answered once. Closer now, their tone different, resolved. Evelyn stood at the window and saw shapes at the edge of the trees, tall silhouettes holding position, their presence announced not by threat, but by restraint. She felt the moment sharpen, the way air does before a decision is made. The wolf stepped beside her and lowered its head slightly, a gesture that carried weight, and she understood that the time for quiet waiting was ending. She opened the door and cold spilled in, clean and bracing. The wolf moved forward into the porch light and paused, turning back to her, eyes searching her face for permission she had already given in 100 small ways. She placed her hand against its chest, feeling that steady rhythm she knew so well, and nodded once. The wolf stepped out into the snow, breath clouding, and the air shimmered faintly around it. The change was not sudden or violent, but deliberate, like dawn easing into day. Form adjusted, lines refined, and where the wolf had stood now stood a man, tall and pale, wrapped in the echo of white fur that faded into a simple cloak. His hair fell light against his shoulders, his posture composed, and when he looked at her, recognition settled between them like a shared name. He did not speak at first. He placed a hand over his heart and inclined his head, a formal gesture made gentle by sincerity. Evelyn felt no fear, only the deep calm of understanding something that had been true all along. She stepped onto the porch beside him, boots sinking into fresh snow, and faced the waiting figures beyond the clearing. They did not advance. They bowed, each in turn, metal catching the light as they did so, acknowledging not conquest but confirmation. The man beside her spoke then, voice steady, carrying without force. He said he was Rowan. He said the crown had waited for a sound it did not understand until it was heard in kindness rather than command. He said the mountains had kept him until the right. Door opened. Evelyn listened, letting the words pass through her without needing to hold them. She had never wanted a larger world, only a truer one. The figures withdrew into the trees, leaving the clearing as it had been, snow settling, branches sighing under new weight. Rowan turned back to her, eyes warm, and for a moment the space between them held everything that might come next. She smiled, small and certain, and gestured toward the cabin, the fire waiting inside. Whatever paths lay ahead would be walked deliberately. For now, there was warmth to share, and a quiet understanding that the most powerful choices rarely announced themselves with anything louder than a knock at the door. The cabin felt smaller with Rowan inside it, not because he filled the space, but because meaning did. Evelyn poured water and set it to heat, the simple motions steadying her hands, while Rowan stood near the hearth, posture respectful, eyes taking in the room as if memorizing a map he intended to honor. The cloak he wore seemed woven of winter itself, pale and quiet, and when he moved, the firelight traced patterns across it that reminded her of the markings she had glimpsed beneath 4 days ago. He spoke carefully, choosing words the way one chooses steps on ice, telling her of a line of rulers bound not by blood alone, but by listening, of a crown shaped less like a circle and more like a promise that bent toward whoever could hear the land and answer without command. He said the prophecy had been misunderstood, reduced to a measurement and a sound, when it had always been about timing and mercy. Evelyn listened, nodding, absorbing the truth without needing to possess it. She offered him a mug, and he accepted it with both hands, warmth blooming against cold fingers, the gesture grounding something ancient into the present. Outside, the snow deepened, the world quieting into a white-held breath. Rowan spoke of the watchers who had waited, of the restraint that had preserved the realm when force would have broken it, of how the mountains had kept him in the only shape that could teach patience. He said her door had not been chosen because it was hidden, but because it was open. The words settled between them, neither heavy nor light, simply accurate. Evelyn felt the truth of it in the way the cabin creaked, the way the clock ticked, the way her own life had narrowed until it could hold exactly this moment. When he finished, silence returned, not awkward but complete. She asked a single question, quiet and direct, about what would be required next. Rowan answered without flourish. There would be a journey, not immediately, and not as a spectacle. There would be voices to hear and agreements to mend. There would be a choice he would have to make that no one else could make for him, and a choice she would never be asked to make at all. Relief flickered across her face, and he noticed, smiling softly. He said the crown had learned, finally, that it could not claim what kindness had freely given. The wind pressed against the cabin and then moved on. Rowan rose and stepped to the door, opening it just enough to look out at the snow-laden trees, then closed it again, sealing warmth inside. He removed the cloak and folded it carefully, setting it aside as if it were not armor but a memory. When he sat, it was not on the chair but on the floor near the fire, mirroring the way the wolf had rested, honoring the path that had brought him here. Evelyn smiled at the recognition and resumed her small tasks, the ordinary continuing to do its quiet work. As night settled, she felt the resonance ease, no longer a call but a confirmation, and understood that the prophecy had been fulfilled not by a sound heard far away, but by a heartbeat kept close, steady through cold and doubt, waiting for the moment when it could be trusted to lead. Morning arrived clear and bright, the storm spent, snow laid smooth across the clearing like a page turned clean. Evelyn rose early and brewed coffee, the familiar scent anchoring her as the cabin warmed. Rowan stood at the window, watching light move through branches, his reflection faint in the glass, a figure both present and already leaving. They spoke little, not out of reluctance, but because the quiet had earned its place. He thanked her without ceremony, acknowledging not a debt, but a shared moment that could not be repaid because it had never been owed. She accepted with a nod and offered him bread wrapped for the road, a small kindness made practical. When he stepped outside, the forest seemed to recognize him without fanfare. No horns sounded. No watchers appeared. The mountains held their silence, satisfied. Rowan paused at the edge of the clearing and turned back once more. For a breath, the white of winter gathered around him, and the shape she had first known flickered at the edges of her sight, not as a transformation but as a memory honored. He smiled, a human expression warmed by something older, and then he was moving away, steps sure, the trail opening as if it had always been waiting. Evelyn stood on the porch until the trees closed behind him and the clearing returned to itself. She went back inside and tended the fire, the clock ticking on, the cabin settling into its accustomed sounds. Days followed with the steady rhythm she trusted. She split wood, hauled water, mended what needed mending. The mark near the clearing faded beneath new snow, leaving no sign for those who might look for it later. Occasionally, a distant glint would appear and vanish along the ridge, a presence acknowledging without intruding. The radio stayed quiet. In time, news arrived the way it always did, carried by travelers who stopped for warmth and left with stories they could not quite explain, of agreements reached without spectacle, of a crown set aside until it could be lifted by consent, of a leader who listened before he spoke and chose restraint when urged toward display. Evelyn listened, offered coffee, and asked after the roads. She did not correct their words or add her own. When winter eased into spring, the forest softened, and the creek sang louder. Evelyn found a small token placed on her table one morning, simple and unadorned, shaped like a circle that bent inward at one point, as if acknowledging a door. She turned it in her hands and set it beside the clock, where it caught the light at certain hours and then disappeared into shadow. Life continued, not smaller for what had passed but steadier. On quiet evenings, she would step outside and listen, feeling the land breathe, feeling her own heartbeat answer, steady and sure. She understood then, with a calm that did not seek proof, that the prophecy had never belonged to the crown or the realm alone. It belonged to the space between a knock and an answer, too. The choice to open a door when the night pressed close, to the simple act of keeping a rhythm until someone else learned how to hear it. And in the silence that followed, the stars reflected faintly in the cabin window, and for once, they seemed content to let the world turn without their witness.